Hello AP English 3 students. Welcome to a magical adventure of the great American literary periods.
Yes. A true exploration this will be for two great presidents, wouldn't you say, Barack?
George, I must agree. Would you like to begin?
The Native American literary movement was the first literary period in American history. Dating back to the first Indians, there are no real clear dates as to when it started. The writings were inspired by ancient oral tradition stories and common Native American myths.
With the arrival of Europeans to America, came the Puritan movement, which started in around 1500 and lasted until around 1750. The types of writing from this period include histories, journals, personal poems, and diaries, which were largely influenced by the Puritan ideals and values. Notable writers include John Winthrop, Jonathan Edwards, and William Bradford. Major works like Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, The Day of Doom, and The Tenth Muse urged to succeed and exceed God's expectations, and introduced a belief that hard work necessary for happiness.
The Enlightenment was the next literary movement, and it was based on a more scientific, logical, and reasonable approach to things, as it tried to eliminate the dependence on the Bible while still searching for truth. This period started around 1750 and lasted up to the turn of the 19th century. The literature of the time include political documents, speeches, and letters written by people like Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Paine, Thomas Jefferson, and Alexander Hamilton. Major works include Letters from a Farmer in Pennsylvania, The Federalist Papers, and Common Sense.
Romanticism captured America next in 1800, lasting until the Civil War, as it moved from political documents to entertaining stories written by Cooper, Poe, Thoreau, Emerson, Dickinson, Hawthorne, and Melville. It focused on fancy, imagination, emotion, and nature, and was inspired reaction against 18th-century neoclassicism, while works like Nature, The Raven, and Moby Dick all captured readers.
Transcendentalism was the next literary movement, which lasted from around 1840 to 1869 and was based in the New England area. People like Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, and Elizabeth Peabody believed that experiences were guides to truth rather than reason. It was influenced by Romanticism and retained its individual and natural aspects, and it had an optimistic and idealistic of humans. The Transcendentalist, Walden, and Self-Reliance were major works.
Anti-transcendentalism took place during the same time as the Transcendentalists movement, but was the opposite of Transcendentalists, as it was pessimistic, and it focused on the wrongdoings and sins of humans. Notable writers were Hawthorne and Melville with their respective works of Scarlet Letter and Moby Dick.
Realism exposed political corruption, economic inequity, business deception, the exploitation of labor, women rights problems, racial inequity, and described the relationship between the economic transformation of America and its moral condition. It began in 1860 and lasted to the 1890s. Mark Twain, Henry James, and Robert Frost were main authors who oftentimes implied local color in their works. The Portrait of a Lady, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and The Road Not Taken were important works.
Naturalism was the next movement, and it intensified the pessimism of the realism movement, lasting from 1890 to 1860. It shows more unpleasant, ugly, shocking aspects of life. Crane wrote The Red Badge of Courage, Lewis wrote Abbott, and Dreiser wrote An American Tragedy. Influenced by instabilities in society, naturalism was also inspired a detachment from the sciences. The naturalists tended to view people as hapless victims of immutable natural laws.
Regionalism, another outgrowth of realism, is in literature the tendency among certain authors to write about specific geographical areas. Regional writers like Willa Cather and William Faulkner present the distinct culture of an area, including its speech, customs, beliefs, and history. Regionalists, like the Southern writers of the 1920s, usually give a sophisticated sociological or anthropological treatment of the culture of a region. The naturalists tended to view people as hapless victims of immutable natural laws starting just after the Civil War and into the 20th century. Works included in the Tennessee Mountains, Alexander's Bridge, and Snubb's Trilogy.
Imagism was a literary movement that flourished between 1912 and 1927. Led by Ezra Pound and Amy Lowell, the Imagist poets rejected 19th-century poetic forms and language. Instead, they wrote short poems. They used ordinary language and free verse to create sharp, exact, concentrated pictures. Poems included Corycus, To a Greek Marble, and Orchard, along with the formation of several poetry magazines.
The modern age of literature is one of disillusionment and confusion, influenced by war, depressions, and corruption, in the midst of American prosperity. This period brought us perhaps our best writers. The authors during this period raised all the great questions of life, but offered no answers. Faulkner, Steinbeck, Fitzgerald, Hemingway, and Frost are all examples. Light and August, Of Mice and Men, and The Great Gatsby are all influential works.
Part of the modern age, the Harlem Renaissance, which occurred during the 1920s, was a time of African-American artistic creativity centered in Harlem, in New York City. Partly a result of the African-American movement from rural areas into large cities, African-Americans were able to develop a unique culture. Writers of the Harlem Renaissance include Countee Cullen, Claude McKay, Jean Toomer, and Langston Hughes. Works from this period include One Way to Heaven, Not Without Laughter, and The Chinnaberry Tree.
The contemporary period began at the end of World War II in 1946 and continues up to the present. The contemporary period is very diverse as it has been influenced by a great deal of issues but primarily by the times of change and the new technologies that have had an impact on Americans' lives. Important authors include Ginsberg, Barthelme, and Ellison with works of Howl, Snow White, and Invisible Man respectively.
Thank you for joining us today.